We are talking Robin Hood from 2010, and this is once again teaming Ridley Scott with Russell Crowe, who have found great success with the movie Gladiator. And it's clear that this movie is trying to recreate the experience and the kind of the movie event that was Gladiator into this kind of Robin Hood. Obviously, apart from Ridley Scott and Russell Crowe, you actually have a lot of people who are involved in Gladiator returning here to either work behind the camera or a couple of instances in front of the camera. We've even got some of the same horses that were in Gladiator end up in this Robin Hood 2010 as well. And there are also kind of some familiar themes that make this movie feel less like a Robin Hood movie and more like a sort of redux of Gladiator. Of course, the character of Robin Longstride, as he's named in this one, is a guy who has a tragic backstory with his kind of family, and he's a kind of anti-authority figure leading a band of ragtag, outsiders to try and stick it to the man, so to speak. Forbidden loves and all the rest of it. So there are some elements here that seem strangely familiar with the Gladiator film in some ways, and it's clear that they're trying to get lightning to strike twice, basically. This is actually a sort of prequel, I guess you would call it, to the main Robin Hood sort of story, I suppose. What is the story of this movie? So it focuses on Crowe as Robin Longstride, who is an archer in the army, basically. And we meet him initially in France, where he is with Richard the Lionheart, and they're attacking a kind of a French castle. And he's with his what will become his merry men. Through some circumstances, Lionheart is killed, and Robin and his group basically pretend that they are knights and take the identities of some fallen knights to get passage back to England, and they take the crown of Richard the Lionheart back to England, pretending to be these kind of knights, Robert of Loxley in the case of Robin's character, and meet King, who will now become King John, and Robin has kind of vowed to take this kind of sword back to the knight who he took his armour off and things like this, and gets involved with Marion, who is the husband of the just coincidentally of the kind of the knight that he took the identity of. And then we kind of have a plot with Mark Strong's character, who is secretly a French agent who is planning to destable the British kind of empire so the French can come and take over. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about what works in this movie's favour. So this was a big budget film. I actually saw this at the cinema. Obviously, I'm a big Robin Hood fan. I've actually reviewed a few Robin Hood properties on the channel now, and I also really enjoyed the Ridley Scott Gladiator movie with Russell Crowe. So I was quite keen to see this, but it was somewhat of a subdued movie, I have to say. It really didn't have the fanfare that Gladiator did, and kind of somewhat went under the radar. But it clearly was a big, lavish production. I mean, the amount of famous faces that you will see in this movie, obviously heading up the cast, you've got, Russell Crowe, you've got Cate Blanchett as Maid Marion, you've got Max von Sydow, you've got Mark Strong, you've got Oscar Isaac, just to name a few. But there is a lot more familiar faces here as well. So with that, you've obviously got a high calibre of acting. So the whole movie has this kind of like, for the most part, I don't think Russell Crowe quite nails the Northern English accent, to be honest. But Kevin Costner before him was a lot worse, let's say. But I would say the acting is still pretty high, high sort of bar really across the board here. because you do have many actually Oscar-winning actors in this. So, you know, there is definitely a calibre of acting here because it is a high budget and high production value movie. Also, there's clearly been a lot of money spent on this film. There is, like, for example, scenes where we have seemingly like hundreds of extras kind of fighting. There's a climatic battle on the kind of the beach towards the end of the movie. It's not as good as it could have been, but there's certainly a sort of a large scale to it. In actual fact, I have to say this movie feels less like a Robin Hood movie and more like a medieval war movie. In actual fact, I've forgotten the name of the movie. There was a film about the Crusades with Orlando Bloom. The name escapes me, and it kind of feels a little bit more like that, to be honest with you, than it does actually a Robin Hood movie. So if you want a kind of a medieval war movie, then you may want to kind of check it out. I will say that kind of everything here in a production value, I think, is strong. The stunts, the kind of the practical kind of sets and costume and makeup all look good, and I think there's an attention to detail here in regards to the kind of the dirty look. I mean, I think sometimes I reviewed a 2025 series of Robin Hood recently, and they're all a little bit clean and clean shaven here. Here they at least feel a little bit kind of like grubby and stuff, so there's a little bit of an attention to detail with this. And it's a longer film, and you know, it has this time to try and give us some kind of like quite an in-depth kind of story. And I suppose credit must be given here for trying to not retell your typical Robin Hood story. I mean, this is a double-edged sword, which I'm going to come on to in just a second, but there clearly has been a lot of Robin Hood adaptations at this point. So Ridley Scott and his team have obviously wanted to tell a different story, still within that world. This is why it's kind of a prequel. So we have Robin Hood, really like you haven't seen him in these kind of situations before. This is really Robin Hood the soldier, more so than the outlaw. If you've ever seen the G.I. Joe Snake Eyes movie, it's like that, where he doesn't really become Snake Eyes until the very end of the movie, and that's true of this one. He doesn't really become Robin Hood until the very, very end of the movie. Here he is Robin Longstride, a soldier who ends up kind of being involved in the armies of England, trying to defend from the French. So it's a very different Robin Hood film because of that. But this obviously brings me to what doesn't work, because it doesn't feel like a Robin Hood movie. There's so little to do with what the established Robin Hood lore is about here. It just seems to go on a massive tangent about the kind of like this medieval kind of politics and war, that you really don't feel like the character that we're seeing portrayed by Russell Crowe is Robin Hood, because there's really no sort of robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. He doesn't really seem, he's never really an outlaw at any point in this movie until right at the very, very end. The movie has so many sort of, I've got to say, the biggest problem here is the script for me, because I think this script here is very contrived. I mean, so Robin Hood takes the identity of Robert of Loxley, who was a knight that was in the service of King Richard the Lionheart. It just so happens that the Loxleys have a backstory that connects with Robin Longstride's family, and who are, you know, very much interconnected. But he didn't know that. It just so happens that Maid Marion was Robert of Loxley's wife, and now the love interest of Robin Longstride. So there's all this kind of stuff here that just feels like really contrived and sort of convenient. And the other issue, I think, is the kind of the plot seems to just, it seems to me that this movie has been cut to pieces in the editing room, because it's quite a long film. There are elements introduced that are here that never really seem to pay off. And they'll just give you a small one. So Oscar Isaac plays in the beginning Prince John, who then goes into become King John, and he is married to someone else at the beginning of the movie, but later on he's married to a French princess. But what happened to the original wife? You know, it just skips over it. And there's a variety of other things like these, like children that are living in the forest that are just kind of like sort of glossed over and things like this. And it's just there seem to be all of these elements here that there seems to have been loads of ideas, and I wouldn't be surprised with Ridley Scott that there was like some sort of 6-hour edit here where probably everything is connected, but it's been edited down, and therefore it seems kind of at odds, where a lot of the kind of the plot points here seem contrived, a lot of the plot points here seem kind of just lost. So that just is a little bit, it just feels a little bit messy in regards to kind of like plotting and narrative. There are some elements that I just feel a little bit on the kind of the cheesy side. Mark Strong's Godfrey character, who is our de facto bad guy, is a kind of an English traitor who's secretly working for the French. And he, of course, he's got this big scar on his face that was given to him by Robin at the beginning of the movie. Again, it's this contrived sort of like convenience and everything like that. And he's like a real like mustache twirling kind of villain, to be honest with you. And the kind of like the element here where we have this kind of 200 French soldiers that no one seems to have really made a point of sort of like, oh look, there's 200 French soldiers landing on the beach apart from one guy, and they're posing as King John's men, who are now like causing trouble and kind of like trying to create division. And it just seems, again, it just seems like so a bit of a silly concept, to be honest. And then this kind of like this battle at the end where we have these kind of World War II ships kind of like coming that are kind of delivering the French soldiers and stuff. It just seems out of time. So again, this feels more like Kingdom of Heaven is the movie I'm thinking of. So Kingdom of Heaven, you know, I feel more about the Crusades and stuff, even though this isn't about the kind of like the you know, the Crusades in Palestine and everything. But nonetheless, it feels more like that than a Robin Hood film. And I think that's the other thing, is it doesn't feel like a Robin Hood film. And I have to say as well, I think Russell Crowe does a good job here, but I don't think he's he's nowhere near as charismatic as he was as Maximus in the Gladiator film. So, you know, he kind of feels a little bland. He doesn't do a bad job, but you never really feel like the character is all that dynamic, to be honest. He just feels like a facsimile of Maximus. The Merry Men, I mean, again, we get the kind of the barest sort of feel about these kind of characters. I mean, at least they had Allan A'Dayle, who is kind of one of the Merry Men who rarely ever gets a look in adaptations. But, you know, again, that they seem to be the barest minimums of characters, which is weird when you consider how long this movie is and how much time they kind of spend on other elements. And I've got to say, I think the end kind of battle scene, you know, it's large scale, but it seems to be a little bit, the way it's filmed, it could have been better. Like, for example, the finale of this will remind you of the opening battle scene from Gladiator in a way, in regards to scale, but it never seems quite as epic as that. It never kind of feels quite as exciting as that. There's a few shots here that I think are quite good, but it ultimately, you know, feels there was missed opportunities with it. So how to rate this film? I think it's not a bad film, but when you compare this, you've got to think of the budget that was involved, the talent that was involved, you know, all the kind of the resources that were available to make this film. For it to be somewhat middling in regards to kind of plotting and some of the kind of the decisions that were made here, I've got to look at this harder than I would do if it was like a lower budget film, because I think there was the opportunity here for it to be better was so much more achievable than a low budget movie that might sort of struggle. So as such, I'm going to give this movie a 5 out of 10. Now, I don't think this is a bad film, but I think it's kind of just an average film for what could have been when you consider the resources that were available. And it seems like a bit of a misfire. Certainly not a bad film, certainly watchable, but it never really kind of fires. And as I say, if you want a genuine Robin Hood movie, this does not feel like it. 5 out of 10. What were your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.